They said, "We didn't get you a birthday gift because we're tight on money, but I checked the joint card I let them use and saw $800 spent at a spa the same day. So I froze the account and texted, 'Enjoy your relaxation. It's over.'" So this just happened a few weeks ago, and honestly, I'm still a little stunned by how bold they were. I had been dating Maya for just over a year. We weren't living together officially, but she stayed over a lot. A few months ago, she ran into some money. Trouble. Job layoffs, car trouble, that whole spiral. I helped where I could. I wasn't rolling in cash, but I had a decent savings and a credit card I rarely used. She asked if she could use it for essentials until she got back on her feet. I agreed, but we made it a joint card just to keep things clear. Big mistake. Fast forward to my birthday. I wasn't expecting a yacht party or anything, but I thought maybe a dinner, a card, something. Instead, she showed up late, empty-handed, and said, "I'm so sorry. I feel terrible. Things are just so tight right now." I told her it was okay, because, hey, life happens. But something didn't sit right. She was dressed to the nines, hair freshly styled, nails done, even wearing this expensive perfume I know isn't cheap. Later that night, curiosity got the best of me. I checked the card's transaction history, $812.43, at a luxury spa on my birthday. While telling me she couldn't afford even a slice of cake, I just stared at the screen for like a full minute. I scrolled further, mani-pedi, deep tissue massage, facial, and some add-on aromatherapy enhancement. The kicker? She wasn't alone. The note said, "Couples package." So I did the only logical thing. I froze the account. Then I sent her a text that said, "Enjoy your relaxation. It's over." Cue the 10-paragraph reply about how I was overreacting, how it was a gift for both of us she was going to surprise me with later, and my personal favorite, how I was financially abusive for freezing the card without notice. Girl, I gave you notice. When I told you that card was for essentials, I didn't mean essential oils. Anyway, card's closed. She's blocked. My new birthday tradition? Trust, but verify. I guess I should back up a bit and explain how Maya and I met. It was at my friend Jim's housewarming party, one of those events where you don't know half the people there, but everyone's pretending they're having a great time. She was standing alone by the snack table, looking bored but somehow still radiant. There was something magnetic about her. Maybe it was the way she rolled her eyes every time someone made a corny joke, or how she seemed to know exactly which cheese paired with which cracker. We started talking, and 4 hours later we were still there, sitting on Jim's balcony while the party wound down around us. That first conversation was effortless. She told me about her job at a marketing firm, how she'd moved to the city 3 years ago, and her dreams of eventually opening her own boutique. I shared stories about my family, my job as a software developer, and my embarrassing collection of vintage video games. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and I texted her the very next day. Too eager? Maybe, but she responded. Within minutes. What struck me about Maya from the beginning was her confidence. She moved through the world with this assurance that was almost hypnotic. When we went out to dinner, she'd chat up the waitstaff like they were old friends. At parties, she was always the center of attention, telling stories that had everyone laughing. I, on the other hand, tend to be more reserved, more cautious. We complemented each other well, or so I thought. Our early dating days were like something out of a movie. We'd meet after work for impromptu dinners, spend weekends exploring hidden corners of the city, and stay up until 3 a.m. talking about everything from childhood memories to our wildest dreams. She was spontaneous in a way that balanced my more structured approach to life. If I suggested we try a new restaurant next weekend, she'd counter with, "Why not tonight?" More often than not, I'd agree, and we'd end up having some adventure that made for a great story later. I remember this one time, about 2 months into dating, she called me at work on a Friday afternoon. "Pack a bag," she said. "I'm picking you up in an hour." "What? Where are we going?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my weekend plans. "It's a surprise. Just bring clothes for 2 days and something nice for dinner." She'd booked us a weekend at a charming bed and breakfast in wine country, about a 3-hour drive from the city. It was one of those places with clawfoot tubs and 4-poster beds and homemade scones at breakfast. We spent Saturday touring vineyards, sampling wines, and eventually having a romantic dinner at a small farm-to-table restaurant overlooking the valley. It was perfect. Almost too perfect, I realize now. Because when the check came for dinner, over $300, she made a show of reaching for her wallet before realizing she'd left it in the hotel room. I paid, of course, and thought nothing of it, just like I thought nothing of covering the hotel. When her credit card was mysteriously declined at checkout. "I'll pay you back as soon as we get home," she promised. I must have hit my limit with the car rental. She never did, and that became a pattern. 6 months in, things were still going strong. She started staying over at my place more frequently. At first it was just weekends, then a weeknight here and there. Eventually she had a drawer, then a section of my closet, and finally her own set of keys. It wasn't a formal moving in situation. She still paid rent at her own apartment, but in practice we were practically living together. I should have been more curious about her apartment. I'd been there a few times early in our relationship, but as she spent more time at my place, she seemed to have reasons why I couldn't visit hers. The heating was broken, the neighbors were noisy, the building was fumigating. In hindsight, I wonder if she was even still living there, or if she'd moved most of her things to my place while maintaining the pretense of having her own space. Looking back, there were red flags I chose to ignore, like how she always seemed to be short on cash when the bill came, despite her well-paying job, or how she'd make comments about my financial privilege whenever I suggested we split a dinner check. At the time, I chalked it up to different money management styles, or maybe just bad luck with unexpected expenses. I thought I was being understanding. There was this incident about 7 months into our relationship that should have been a wake-up call. We were at the mall, and Maya saw a pair of boots she loved. They were expensive, $450, and she sighed dramatically about how she could never afford them. I offered to buy them as an early birthday present. Her birthday was still 3 months away, and she was thrilled. But then, as we were leaving the mall, she wanted to stop at a jewelry store. She tried on several pairs of earrings, eventually settling on a pair that cost nearly $300. She looked at me expectantly, clearly hoping I'd offer to buy these too. When I didn't, she became strangely cold, barely speaking to me on the drive home. Later that evening, she picked a fight over something trivial. I think I loaded the dishwasher wrong, and ended up going back to her own apartment for the night. The next day, she returned with an apology and an explanation about how she'd been stressed about work. I accepted it without question. It's embarrassing to admit now, but I was so caught up in the relationship, in the idea of us, that I kept making excuses for behavior that should have set off alarm bells. I wanted to believe in the person I thought she was, not the person her actions were revealing her to be. The trouble started around the 9-month mark. Maya came over one night in tears, saying she'd been laid off as part of a company restructuring. I was sympathetic, of course. Job loss is rough, especially in this economy. I helped her update her resume, connected her with a few contacts in my network, and tried to be a supportive shoulder to lean on. She assured me she had enough savings to cover a month or two of expenses, and I believed her. What's strange is that she never seemed particularly worried about finding a new job. She'd send out a few applications, sure, but she also spent a lot of time on self-care, long baths, Netflix binges, shopping trips with friends. When I gently suggested she might want to treat the job search more like a full-time job itself, she accused me of not understanding how stressful unemployment was and how she needed time to process before jumping back into the workforce. 2 weeks later, her car broke down. The repair estimate was $1,700, money she didn't have while job hunting. I offered to lend her the cash, but she refused, saying she didn't want our relationship to become transactional. A noble sentiment. Perhaps, but in hindsight, it was the first step in a calculated pattern. Instead of accepting a direct loan, she suggested I add her as an authorized user on my credit card, just temporarily, she said, for emergencies and essentials until I'm back on my feet. The idea made me uncomfortable, but I wanted to help. We compromised by getting a joint card with a modest limit, $12,500, attached to my account. I made it clear this was for necessities only. Groceries, gas, maybe the occasional coffee shop interview prep. She agreed enthusiastically, promising to keep track of every penny. The day the card arrived, she insisted we go out to dinner to celebrate our new financial arrangement. We went to a nice restaurant, not extravagant, but definitely not budget-friendly, and she ordered an expensive bottle of wine. When the check came, she proudly pulled out the new card. "I'm treating tonight," she announced. I should have objected, should have clarified again what essentials meant, but I didn't want to embarrass her or start a fight, so I just smiled and thanked her, ignoring the uneasy feeling in my stomach. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed fine. The charges were reasonable. Groceries at Trader Joe's, gas station fill-ups, a LinkedIn premium subscription for job hunting. I even felt a bit guilty for having doubted her intentions. That's the thing about trust. Once you decide to give it, you want to believe you made the right choice. Then came the first questionable purchase, $129 at Sephora. When I casually mentioned it, she had an explanation ready. I had that interview with the tech startup, remember? I needed to look professional. It's an investment in our future. The hour was a nice touch, making me feel like I was being petty for even bringing it up, so I let it go. More interviews meant more investment purchases, a $240 blazer from Nordstrom, $175 shoes that were absolutely necessary for corporate environments, a $90 hair appointment because first impressions matter so much in this job market. Each time I'd express concern, and each time she had a reasonable-sounding justification that made me feel small for questioning her. Around this time, I noticed she'd started receiving packages at my apartment, small ones at first, a lipstick here, a phone case there, then larger ones, clothing, home decor items, even a high-end blender that she claimed was for us, but that matched perfectly with the kitchen in her apartment, not mine. When I asked about these purchases, she'd either pretend they were gifts from friends, or insist they were essential for her mental health during a stressful period. Meanwhile, my own expenses were piling up. Rent, utilities, groceries for two, plus the steadily growing balance on the joint card. I started dipping into my savings, telling myself it was temporary. Maya had several promising interviews after all. She just needed a little more time. What I didn't know then was that she had a pattern of doing this with partners. Much later, after everything fell apart, a mutual friend confided that Maya had a history of financial entanglements with exes. She'd move in, gradually start depending on them financially, then move on when the well ran dry or the questions became too persistent. I wish I'd known this earlier, but Maya had always been vague about her past relationships, and I'd respected her privacy. 3 months into her unemployment, I was starting to feel the financial strain. I tried bringing up the topic one evening over dinner, a home-cooked meal, because restaurants were now firmly in the luxury category for my budget. "I'm wondering if we could go through the card statements together," I suggested, trying to keep my tone casual, just so we're both on the same page about spending. Her reaction was intense. She burst into tears, accusing me of not trusting her, of monitoring her like a child, of making her feel less than during the most vulnerable period of her life. By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing, promising to be more patient, more understanding. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I fell for it completely. She knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to redirect the conversation away from her behavior and toward my supposed failings as a partner. I'd go to bed feeling guilty, promising myself I'd be more supportive, more trusting. The next day, she announced she'd been offered a position at a startup. The salary was lower than her previous job, but it was something. I was relieved, genuinely happy for her. Finally, things would turn around, except they didn't. The new job had a probationary period before benefits kicked in. The hours were long, leaving her too exhausted to cook, which meant more takeout charges on the card. The office was farther away, so more gas expenses. The dress code was casual but fashionable, requiring, you guessed it, more clothing. Purchases. I found myself constantly checking the card balance, anxiety spiking with each new charge. $47 at a wine shop, $63 at a department store, $112 at a salon. Meanwhile, my own credit score was taking a hit from the high utilization rate, and I was having to juggle payments between my personal cards to avoid late fees. I started having trouble sleeping, worrying about money in a way I never had before. My savings were nearly depleted, and I was carrying a balance on my personal credit card for the first time in years. But whenever I tried to address the situation, Maya had a way of turning the conversation around, making me feel guilty for even bringing it up. "I thought you were supportive," she'd say. "I thought you understood what I was going through." And because I did care about her, because I did want to be supportive, I kept swallowing my concerns. I kept telling myself that relationships require sacrifice, that this rough patch would eventually pass. I remember sitting in my car one lunch break, calculating how many months it would take to pay off the joint card if she stopped using it immediately, and I put every spare dollar toward the balance. The answer, 8 months, made me feel physically ill. How had I let things get so out of control? I tried a different approach that evening. Instead of focusing on the past spending, I suggested we create a budget together for the coming month. Nothing judgmental, just a practical plan to help us both get on solid financial footing. She seemed receptive at first, even enthusiastic. We sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and my laptop, mapping out essential expenses. But when I brought up the idea of setting a specific limit for discretionary spending, the mood shifted. She became defensive, then dismissive. "Budgets never work," she declared. "They're too restrictive. People always end up breaking them and feeling worse than before." I pressed the issue, showing her the numbers, trying to make her understand that this wasn't about restriction, but about sustainability. We simply couldn't continue as we had been. "If you're so worried about money," she finally snapped, "maybe we should just break up. Then you wouldn't have to support me anymore." It was manipulation, plain and simple. The threat of ending the relationship to shut down a difficult conversation. And it worked. I backed off, apologized for upsetting her, promised we'd figure things out another way. That night, lying awake beside her, I had a moment of clarity. I realized that I was afraid. Afraid of losing her, yes, but also afraid of confrontation. Afraid of seeming cheap or unsupportive. Afraid of admitting that I'd made a mistake in how I'd handled the whole situation, and she was exploiting that fear, consciously or not, to maintain the status quo. The next morning, I resolved to have a serious talk with her. No budgets, no accusations, just an honest conversation about our financial reality and what we both wanted for the future. But before I could find the right moment, she announced she had a work event that evening and wouldn't be home until late. Which brings us to my birthday. I'd been dropping hints for weeks. Nothing extravagant, just suggestions for a nice dinner at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try, or maybe a weekend getaway to a nearby hiking spot, camping, to keep costs low. Maya had been non-committal, but assured me she'd handle it. Given our financial situation, I expected something modest but thoughtful. A home-cooked meal, perhaps. A handwritten card, even just a sincere acknowledgement of the day. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to an empty bed. Maya had left a note saying she had an early meeting but would see me that evening. No happy birthday. No little gift on the pillow. I told myself not to be disappointed. Adult birthdays aren't a big deal, right? I checked my phone and found messages from my parents, my sister, and several friends, all wishing me a happy birthday. My mom mentioned she'd sent a package that should arrive that day. I felt a twinge of sadness that the person I was sharing my life with hadn't managed even a text message. As I was getting ready for work, I noticed something else. Maya's favorite. Earrings were missing from the dish where she usually kept them. So were her going-out heels, and the dress she'd been saving for a special occasion. I told myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. Maybe she had indeed planned something special for after work. I went to work, where my colleagues had arranged a small celebration with cupcakes and a card everyone had signed. Throughout the day, texts and calls came in from family and friends. My parents sent a care package with homemade cookies and a sweater my mom had knitted. My sister called from Australia, where she's been living for the past year. Even my dentist sent an automated birthday email with a discount on teeth whitening. My boss let me leave early, a birthday tradition in our office, so I stopped by the liquor store on the way home to pick up a nice bottle of whiskey, a small gift to myself. As I was checking out, I ran into an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. We chatted briefly and he asked about my plans for the evening. "My girlfriend probably has something planned," I said, realizing as I spoke that I didn't actually believe it. "Nothing fancy, just dinner maybe." "Well, happy birthday, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You deserve a good one." By the time I got home, I was in good spirits despite the morning's disappointment. I picked up some takeout from my favorite Thai place and set the table with a bottle of wine I'd been saving. Maya had texted she'd be home by 7 p.m. I spent the next hour opening cards and gifts, video chatting with family, and enjoying a quiet moment to myself. 7 o'clock came and went. No Maya. I texted her at 7:30, asking if everything was okay. No response. By 8:00, I'd eaten my now cold dinner alone, the second place setting still. Empty. She arrived at 8:37 p.m., not just late, but spectacularly transformed. Her hair was styled in a way I'd never seen before. Some intricate updo that clearly required professional assistance. Her nails were freshly done, a shimmery burgundy that matched her lipstick, and she was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. The kind of thing you don't just pick up at the mall. But what really caught my attention was the scent. Clive Christian No. 1, a perfume she'd mentioned loving but had described as obscenely expensive. "Happy birthday," she said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before brushing past me to pour herself a glass of wine. "I'm so sorry I'm late. Work was absolutely crazy today." I stood there, trying to process the disconnect between her appearance and her next words. "I feel terrible," she continued, not quite meeting my eyes, "but things are just so tight right now. I couldn't get you a proper gift." My brain was working overtime, trying to reconcile the woman standing before me, dripping in what appeared to be several $100s worth of beauty treatments, with the claim that she couldn't afford even a card. I assured her it was fine, that her presence was enough, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. As we ate the now cold Thai food, she chatted about her day, about office politics and client demands. Not once did she ask about my birthday, about my day, about the cards displayed on the mantle or the half-eaten cupcake in the fridge. At one point, her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, smiled softly, and quickly put the phone face down on the table. When I asked who it was, she said, "Just a work thing," and swiftly changed the subject. After dinner, she said she was exhausted and headed for the shower. I sat at the table, staring at our empty plates, a strange suspicion building. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. Something wasn't adding up. I don't normally check up on people. I'm not the snooping type, but in that moment, I needed to know. I opened the banking app on my phone and pulled up the joint cards activity, and there it was, $812.43 at Eternal Bliss Spa and Salon, time-stamped that very morning. I clicked for the details, and the full picture emerged. A deluxe package including a massage, facial, hairstyling, manicure, pedicure, and yes, that aromatherapy enhancement. And the most damning detail, couples package, 2 persons. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, not just because of the money, though that was certainly part of it, but because of the sheer audacity of the lie. She couldn't afford even a slice of cake for my birthday, but she could drop over $800 on a spa day with someone else. I scrolled through the rest of the day's transactions. $93 at a boutique lingerie store, $127 at a high-end liquor shop, $45 at a florist. None of these purchases had made their way to me or my apartment. It was like watching a parallel reality unfold on my phone screen, a day of luxury and romance that I wasn't part of, all funded by the card I was ultimately responsible for. When she emerged from the shower, I was still sitting at the table, my phone in front of me, the transaction details displayed on the screen. I didn't even have to say anything. She took one look at my face and knew. "I can explain," she began, but I cut her off. "Who were you with?" "What?" "The couples package. Who was it for?" Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation, and finally, indignation. "Are you spying on me now?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Checking my transactions like I'm some kind of criminal?" "It's a joint account," I reminded her, "and you told me to my face that you couldn't afford a birthday gift because money was tight, yet somehow you found $800 for a spa day on my birthday." "That's different," she insisted. "That was essential," I supplied, "because we agreed this card was for essentials only. So please explain to me how a deep tissue massage and aromatherapy were essential expenses." She changed tactics then, tears welling up. "I've been under so much stress with the new job. The doctor said I needed to take care of my mental health. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "And the second person?" I pressed. "Who was that? Also essential to your mental health?" She hesitated just a fraction too long. "My sister. She's been going through a tough time too, and I thought..." "Your sister lives in Florida," I said flatly. "She has been in Florida for the past 3 weeks. You told me that yourself when you were complaining about having to handle your mom's birthday on your own." That's when the story started to unravel completely. She cycled through several explanations, each one more implausible than the last. It was a gift certificate she'd won months ago. It was a work event disguised as a spa visit for accounting purposes. It was a misunderstanding. The charge was higher than expected, and she'd planned to dispute it. Finally, exhausted by her own contradictions, she admitted the truth. She'd been seeing someone else, casually she insisted, for a few weeks. A co-worker from the new job. The spa day had been his idea, a chance for them to connect outside the office. "It didn't mean anything," she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "It was just a bit of fun. You've been so stressed about money lately, so preoccupied with budgets and expenses. I needed a break." I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was as if I'd been struggling to put together a puzzle with missing pieces, and suddenly the final piece had been found. Everything made sense now. The late nights, the mysterious text messages, the new clothes and perfume that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You used the card I'm financially responsible for to fund a spa date with someone you're cheating on me with, and then had the audacity to come home and tell me you couldn't afford a birthday gift for me because money is tight?" She flinched at the word cheating, but didn't deny it. Instead, she launched into a long explanation about how lonely she'd been feeling, how I hadn't been emotionally available, how this other person had just been a shoulder to lean on initially, but things had escalated unexpectedly. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I simply stood up, walked to the bedroom, and started packing her things. The makeup bag she kept in my bathroom, the clothes she'd gradually infiltrated into my closet, the spare phone charger, the fancy tea she liked, the novel she'd been reading. I placed it all in a duffel bag she'd left at my place months ago. When I returned to the living room, she was crying for real now, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that she loved me and only me. I think you should go back to your apartment tonight, I said, handing her the bag. We can talk more tomorrow when we've both had time to think. You're overreacting, she said, not taking the bag. It was one mistake. One day. Are you really going to throw away a year of relationship over this? It wasn't one day, I replied. It was months of lies, months of taking advantage of my trust. The spa day is just the final straw. I can pay you back, she offered. I'll get a second job if I have to. I'll work weekends. Please, just give me another chance. Part of me, a small, weak part, was tempted. Despite everything, I did love her, or at least I loved the person I thought she was, but that person didn't exist. The real Maya was standing in front of me, mascara streaking down her face, still trying to manipulate me even after being caught red-handed. I need you to leave, I said, my voice firm. Now. She left reluctantly, still protesting, still trying to spin a narrative where she was more victim than perpetrator. As soon as the door closed behind her, I opened the banking app again and froze the joint card. Then I sent that text, "Enjoy your relaxation. It's over." Her response came within minutes, a barrage of messages that ranged from apologetic to accusatory to downright manipulative. I didn't know the whole story. I was jumping to conclusions. I was being cruel. I was financially abusing her by cutting off access without warning. I should call her immediately so she could explain properly. I read them all, watching the timestamps tick by as the messages grew increasingly desperate. 10:47 p.m. Please call me. 11:03 p.m. I can explain everything. 11:18 p.m. You're being really immature about this. 11:42 p.m. I'm worried about you. Are you okay? 12:15 a.m. Fine, be that way. I never loved you anyway. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and tried to process the events of the day. The betrayal wasn't just about the potential infidelity. It was about the months of deception, the financial drain, the emotional manipulation. It was about someone taking advantage of my goodwill and trust. As I sat there, I started to add up the financial damage. The joint card was maxed out at $2,500. My savings had dwindled from a comfortable $15,000 to just under $4,000. I was carrying balances on 2 personal credit cards, totaling about $3,800. All in all, I'd spent or committed to spending over $17,000 in the past 6 months, far more than I could comfortably afford. And for what? For someone who couldn't even be bothered to get me a birthday card? That night I slept surprisingly well, as if a weight had been lifted. In the morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely do, and spent the day methodically reclaiming my life. First, I called the credit card company and formally closed the joint account. I explained the situation honestly. I had authorized a user who had abused the privilege. The representative was sympathetic and promised to expedite the closure process. They also suggested I place a fraud alert on my credit report just to be safe. Next, I texted my landlord to change the locks, explaining that a key holder was no longer authorized to enter the premises. He agreed to send a locksmith that afternoon. Then I went through my apartment, room by room, collecting any remaining items of Maya's. There were more than I'd realized. A pair of slippers under the bed, a robe hanging in the bathroom, a notebook on the bookshelf. I packed them all neatly in a box, labeled it with her name, and put it in the hall closet, out of sight. Finally, I blocked Maya's number, her email, her social media. A clean break, like ripping off a bandage. The next few days were a strange mix of feelings. Relief, certainly. Anger, definitely. But also grief. I was mourning the relationship I thought I had, the future I'd imagined with someone who turned out to be a fiction. Friends questioned if I was overreacting. Everyone makes mistakes, they said. Maybe you should hear her out. But they hadn't seen the pattern I'd been ignoring for months. They didn't know about the emotional toll, the dwindling savings, the gnawing anxiety that had become my constant companion. One friend, though, was firmly in my corner. Jim, the same friend whose housewarming party had introduced me to Maya in the first place, came over with pizza and beer the weekend after the breakup. I should have warned you, he said after I'd told him the whole story. I'd heard rumors about her, but I didn't know for sure, and I didn't want to interfere if things were going well. What kind of rumors? I asked. He hesitated before answering. That she has a habit of finding someone stable, moving in, and gradually taking over their finances. There was a guy before you, Patrick, I think his name was. She did pretty much the same thing to him. When he finally cut her off, she moved on to you. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach, and now she's moved on to this new coworker. Jim nodded grimly. Probably. It's a pattern with her. That conversation was both vindicating and disturbing. On one hand, it confirmed I wasn't crazy for feeling exploited. On the other, it meant Maya's behavior wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated strategy she'd used before and would likely use again. In the days that followed, I discovered more disturbing details. Packages delivered to my address that I never saw. Items she must have intercepted and kept or resold. Subscriptions started in my name without my knowledge. A small loan she'd apparently taken out using my address as hers. The spa day wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of a long-running scheme. I spent hours on the phone with credit card companies, subscription services, and even a loan officer, explaining the situation and trying to disentangle my finances from Maya's deceptions. Most were understanding, but some required police reports or formal fraud complaints, processes that were time-consuming and emotionally draining. The financial impact was one thing, but the emotional fallout was in some ways worse. I found myself questioning my own judgment, wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening happening. I replayed conversations in my head, seeing patterns I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored. She tried to contact me through mutual friends, through colleagues, even through my parents. How she got their number, I still don't know. Each time, the message was the same. She was sorry, she would change, she would pay me back every penny. But some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. A month after the breakup, I received a check in the mail for $500, a first installment, according to the note attached, toward paying back what she owed. I deposited it, half expecting it to bounce, but it cleared. A week later, another check arrived, this time for $300, and then nothing. No more checks, no more attempts at contact. She'd moved on, just as Jim had predicted. I later heard through the grapevine that she was indeed living with the coworker now, the same one she'd spent my birthday with at the spa. I felt a twinge of sympathy for him, wondering if he knew what he was getting into, if he'd end up in the same position I had. It's been several weeks now. My finances are slowly recovering. I've set up fraud alerts, changed all my passwords, begun the painstaking process of rebuilding my savings. The emotional recovery is taking longer. I find myself second-guessing interactions, wondering if I'm being naive, if I'm missing signs of deception. I've turned down dates, preferring my own company to the risk of being fooled again. But there are good days too. Days when I remember that my capacity for trust is a strength, not a weakness. Days when I remind myself that one person's betrayal doesn't define everyone's intentions. Days when I'm grateful for the lessons learned, painful though they were. In the aftermath of what happened with Maya, I've done a lot of reflecting on how I ended up in that situation in the first place. I've always considered myself a sensible person, not the type to be easily manipulated or deceived. So how did I miss the signs for so long? Part of it, I think, was the gradual nature of her deception. She didn't start asking for money right away. Instead, she slowly built a narrative of herself as someone temporarily down on her luck, someone who just needed a little help to get back on her feet. Each individual request seemed reasonable in isolation, and by the time the pattern became clear, I was already emotionally invested. Then there was the shame factor. As the financial reality became increasingly dire, I found myself reluctant to admit, even to myself, that I'd been taken advantage of. It was easier to believe her excuses, to hope things would improve, than to confront the possibility that I'd been played for a fool. And of course, there was love, or what I thought was love. Looking back, I realized that what Maya offered wasn't genuine emotional connection, but a carefully crafted simulation of it. She studied me, my desires, my insecurities, my triggers, and presented herself as the perfect complement. When I wanted adventure, she was spontaneous. When I wanted deep conversation, she was philosophical. When I wanted reassurance, she was affectionate. It was like dating a chameleon, one that could transform itself into exactly what I needed at any given moment. The irony is that if she'd put that much effort into an honest relationship, into actual emotional labor rather than manipulation, we might have had something real. But I've come to understand that for people like Maya, the thrill isn't in the connection, but in the con. It's not about building something lasting, but about seeing how much they can extract before moving on to the next target. 2 months after the breakup, I ran into her at a coffee shop. I hadn't expected to see her. It was in a different neighborhood than either of us typically frequented, but there she was, sitting at a corner table with a man I assumed was the coworker. She saw me before I could leave, and her face registered surprise, then calculation, then a deliberately casual smile. "Hi," she said, approaching me as I waited for my order. "How have you been?" "Fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You?" "Good, really good." She gestured vaguely toward her companion. "This is Alex, my friend." I nodded in acknowledgement but didn't engage further. I could see Alex watching us curiously from the table, clearly unaware of who I was. "Look," Maya continued, lowering her voice, "I've been meaning to call you. I feel terrible about how things ended. I know I hurt you, and I'm truly sorry." I studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. The words sounded right, but there was something rehearsed about them, something practiced. Her eyes kept darting to Alex, as if checking whether he could hear the conversation. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but I've moved on, and I think you have too." She frowned slightly, perhaps surprised by my lack of emotion. "Can we talk sometime?" "I'd really like to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted. "It's over, Maya. I wish you the best, I really do, but I'm not interested in rehashing the past." Just then, the barista called my name. I collected my coffee, nodded a goodbye to Maya, and left without looking back. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of Alex's face, concerned, questioning, and wondered how long it would be before he too was checking credit card statements and questioning explanations. That brief encounter had an unexpected effect on me. Instead of reopening old wounds, it provided a kind of closure. Seeing Maya in person, hearing her practiced apology, confirmed what I'd been slowly coming to terms with. She wasn't going to change. This wasn't a temporary lapse in judgment, but a fundamental aspect of who she was, and recognizing that made it easier to let go of any lingering what-ifs or maybes. In the weeks that followed, I found myself emerging from the fog of betrayal with a clearer perspective. Yes, I'd been deceived. Yes, I'd lost money and time and emotional energy, but I'd also gained something valuable, insight into my own vulnerabilities, and a determination not to let them be exploited again. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd never considered before. We talked about patterns in my relationships, about my tendency to prioritize others' needs over my own, about the fine line between generosity and enabling. It wasn't always comfortable. Facing your own blind spots rarely is, but it was necessary. I also took steps to rebuild my financial security. I set up a strict budget, using an app that tracked every dollar going in and out. I arranged automatic transfers to rebuild my emergency fund, even if it was just $50 a week. I closed unnecessary credit accounts accounts and consolidated debt where possible. Small steps, but they gave me back a sense of control that had been missing for months. Gradually, life began to normalize. I started accepting social invitations again, though I was more cautious about new relationships. I focused on strengthening connections with trusted friends and family, people who knew me before Maya and who had stood by me throughout the ordeal. Jim was particularly supportive. We started having weekly dinner meetups, alternating between his place and mine. He was dating someone new, a kindergarten teacher named Emma, who seemed genuinely kind and grounded, and seeing their healthy dynamic helped restore my faith in relationships. 4 months after the breakup, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn from a woman named Rachel. "You don't know me," she wrote, "but I think we might have something in common. Have you dated someone named Maya Martinez?" My heart rate spiked as I read the message. I debated whether to respond. Was this some kind of trap? A way for Maya to check whether I was still upset? But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet Rachel for coffee the following weekend. She turned out to be about my age, professionally dressed, with a direct manner that I found reassuring. After some initial small talk, she got to the point. "I dated Maya for about 9 months, 2 years ago," she said. "It ended badly. Financially badly?" I guessed. Rachel nodded grimly. "Credit card fraud, unauthorized loans, the works." By the time I realized what was happening, she'd run up nearly $20,000 in debt under my name. I had to file police reports, freeze my credit, the whole nightmare. I felt a chill run through me. "How did you find me?" "Social media mostly. I saw a photo of the two of you at some concert a few months back, and I recognized her immediately. I've been tracking her in a way, trying to warn people. Have there been others? Besides us, I mean." Rachel sighed. "At least 3 that I know of. There was a guy before me, Jordan something, then me, then a woman named Priya, then you, and now whoever she's with currently." "Alex," I supplied. "At least that's who she was with when I saw her last." We spent the next hour comparing notes, filling in gaps in each other's stories. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Maya would present herself as independent and successful initially, then gradually introduce financial troubles that required temporary assistance. By the time her partners realized the extent of her deception, she had already moved on to her next target. "Did you ever consider legal action?" I asked. Rachel laughed bitterly. "I tried. Filed reports with the police, the FTC, everyone I could think of. But most of what she does isn't technically illegal. If you willingly give someone access to your credit card, it's not fraud in the eyes of the law, and she's careful to stay just on the right side of that line." By the end of our conversation, I felt a mix of emotions. Vindication that I wasn't alone in my experience, anger at the system that allowed someone like Maya to continue her pattern unchecked, and a strange kind of relief that I'd gotten off relatively lightly compared to some of her other victims. Rachel and I exchanged contact information before parting ways, promising to update each other if either of us heard anything new about Maya's activities. It was an odd sort of bond to form with a stranger, but there was comfort in knowing someone else truly understood what I'd been through. That meeting with Rachel marked a turning point in my recovery. It shifted my perspective from seeing myself as a victim of my own poor judgment to recognizing that I'd been targeted by someone who was skilled at manipulation and deception. The shame I'd been carrying began to lift, replaced by a more constructive determination to protect myself in the future. I also felt a responsibility to prevent Maya from harming others if possible. While Rachel's approach of direct intervention seemed too confrontational for my comfort, I did take some steps. I posted reviews of the Eternal Bliss Spa warning about credit card fraud. I reported Maya's loan application that used my address to the relevant financial institutions. Small actions, perhaps, but they gave me a sense of agency. 6 months after the breakup, I received a letter, an actual paper letter, not an email or text, from Maya. The handwriting on the envelope was instantly recognizable, and my first impulse was to throw it away unopened. But after a day of having it sit on my counter, curiosity won out. Inside was a check for $1,500 and a 3-page letter. The check, like the previous ones, was legitimate. I verified with the bank before depositing it. The letter was another matter. It began with what seemed like sincere remorse. She acknowledged the pain she'd caused, the trust she'd broken, the financial hardship she'd created. She explained that she'd been in therapy, working through her issues with money and relationships. She claimed to be making amends to everyone she'd hurt, which apparently included me. But as the letter continued, the tone shifted subtly. She began to justify her actions, the stress she'd been under, the financial pressure, the way her parents had never taught her proper money management. She referred to her behavior as mistakes rather than deliberate choices. And by the final paragraph, she was suggesting that perhaps we could reconnect as friends once I had processed my anger. I read the letter twice, trying to discern its true purpose. Was it a genuine attempt at amends, or just another manipulation? The inclusion of the check suggested some level of real remorse, but the hedging language and subtle deflection of responsibility hinted at a lack of true accountability. In the end, I decided not to respond. I deposited the check, bringing her total repayment to $2,300 out of the thousands she owed, and filed the letter away. If more checks came, I would accept them as partial restitution for what I was owed, but I had had no interest in reopening communication. As it turned out, that was the last I heard from Maya directly. The checks stopped coming. The attempts at contact through mutual friends ceased. It was as if she'd finally accepted that this particular well had run dry and moved on completely. Life continued. I dated casually, but found myself taking things much slower than before, observing potential partners more carefully, paying attention to how they handled money and responsibility. I became more assertive about my own boundaries, more willing to state my needs clearly, rather than assuming they would be respected. 1 year after the breakup, I was in a much better place, financially, emotionally, even professionally. I'd received a promotion at work, partly due to focusing more energy on my career rather than a draining relationship. My savings account was slowly rebuilding. I'd even started dating someone new, a woman named Tessa who was refreshingly straightforward about everything from her career ambitions to her credit score. And as for birthdays, well, I've decided that next year, I'm treating myself to something special. Maybe even a spa day, but I'll be paying for it myself, thank you very much. The strangest part of all this? In a twisted way, that birthday was actually a gift. Without the blatant disregard Maya showed by spending lavishly on herself. While claiming poverty to me, I might have continued in that relationship for months or years, slowly draining my resources and self-respect. Instead, I got clarity. I got confirmation that I wasn't crazy for questioning the inconsistencies. I got a clean break and a valuable lesson about boundaries, financial and otherwise. Last week, I ran into Alex, Maya's friend from the coffee shop, at a networking event. He looked different, thinner, more stressed, with dark circles under his eyes that seemed to tell their own story. We made eye contact across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, he approached me. "You're Maya's ex, right?" he asked without preamble. I nodded, uncertain where this was going. "I should have talked to you that day at the coffee shop," he said, his voice low. "Should have asked questions. Maybe I would have saved myself a lot of trouble." It turned out that Maya had followed the same playbook with him. Financial emergencies, shared credit cards, escalating expenses. But Alex had caught on faster than I had, perhaps because he'd noticed her pattern with the expensive perfume and spa visits even when claiming poverty. "She left last month," he told me. "Cleared out her stuff while I was at work. Blocked my number. The only reason I knew she was gone for good was that all the charges on our shared accounts suddenly stopped." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, sympathy for what he was going through, a certain validation of my own experience, and, if I'm being honest, a small, petty satisfaction that Maya's tactics had finally stopped working. "It gets better," I told him, and I meant it. "The financial stuff takes time to sort out, but it's doable. The trust issues, those take longer." He nodded gratefully, and we exchanged numbers with vague promises to grab a beer sometime. Whether that would ever happen was unclear, but the brief connection felt significant nonetheless. Two people who had survived the same storm, recognizing each other's experience. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how far I'd come in the past year. The financial wounds were healing. I'd paid off the joint card debt completely, and was making good progress on my personal cards. My savings account, while not back to its former level, was growing steadily. More importantly, the emotional scars were fading. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night worrying about money or questioning my judgment. Maya had taken a lot from me. Money, time, trust. But she'd also inadvertently given me something valuable: resilience. I'd been tested, had seen my own vulnerabilities exploited, and had come through stronger and wiser. I was more careful now, yes, but not closed off. More cautious, but not cynical. Tomorrow is my birthday again. The first one since what I now think of as the spa day incident. This year will be different. Tessa has planned something, though. She won't tell me what. My friends are taking me out for drinks this weekend. My parents sent a card with a gift certificate to my favorite bookstore. And I've planned something for myself as well. A small tradition I intend to maintain from now on. I'm setting aside a sum of money, not large but meaningful, to donate to a financial literacy program for young adults. A way of turning a painful experience into something potentially helpful for others. It's strange to think how differently I feel now compared to a year ago. Then I was confused, hurt, angry, mourning not just the relationship but my own naivete. Now, while I certainly wouldn't choose to go through that experience again, I can recognize its value. It taught me about my own boundaries, about the importance of financial transparency in relationships, about the difference between genuine support and enabling harmful behavior. So here's to birthdays that bring unexpected revelations. Here's to learning the difference between generosity and gullibility. And here's to my new personal mantra: trust, but verify. Because sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away. Looking back now with the perspective that time provides, I can see the entire relationship with Maya more clearly. It wasn't all deception and manipulation. There were genuine moments of connection, of joy, of what felt like real love. But those moments were built on a foundation that couldn't sustain them, like a beautiful house constructed on sand. In my more philosophical moments, I wonder about Maya's own story. What led her to develop this pattern of behavior? Was she herself betrayed or exploited at some point? Is she capable of genuine connection? Or has she become so accustomed to performing emotions that she no longer knows what's real? These aren't questions I'll ever have answers to, but they help me frame what happened as part of a larger human story, rather than just my personal misfortune. I've learned to be more attentive to the small inconsistencies in what people say versus what they do, not in a paranoid way, but with a healthy skepticism that I previously lacked. I've become more comfortable asking direct questions when something doesn't add up, more willing to trust my instincts when they signal that something is off. The experience has changed how I view money and relationships as well. Tessa and I had the final finance talk much earlier than I would have previously thought appropriate, discussing our approaches to spending, saving, and debt before we became seriously involved. It wasn't the most romantic conversation, but it established a transparency that feels like solid ground beneath our feet. We keep our finances separate for now, though we take turns paying for dates and shared expenses. If our relationship continues to develop, we've agreed to revisit the conversation about joint accounts or shared financial responsibilities. But we'll approach those decisions with clear eyes and explicit agreements, not vague assumptions that leave room for misunderstanding or exploitation. As for trusting again, that's been the hardest part. There are still moments when a delay in response to a message triggers anxiety, when an unexpected expense makes me question motives. But those moments are becoming less frequent, less intense. I'm learning to distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing suspicion, between protecting myself and isolating myself. Last month, Tessa and I were discussing vacation plans, and she suggested we open a shared savings account specifically for the trip, each contributing an equal amount monthly until we had enough for the getaway we wanted. 5 months ago, such a suggestion would have sent me into a spiral of doubt and defensiveness. Instead, I found myself considering it calmly, recognizing it for what it was, a practical solution to a shared goal, not a potential threat. We opened the account together, setting clear parameters about its purpose and use. The experience was empowering, proof that I could engage in financial collaboration without surrendering control or abandoning common sense. That's the thing. About trust after betrayal. It doesn't return all at once in a grand epiphany of forgiveness and renewal. It comes back gradually, in small moments of vulnerability accepted without exploitation, in promises kept consistently over time, in transparent words matched by consistent actions. As for Maya, I occasionally hear updates through mutual acquaintances. She moved to another city about 6 months ago, presumably when the pool of potential targets in our social circle had been exhausted. I hope, for her sake, and for those she encounters, that she's found a different way to live. But that's no longer my concern or my responsibility. My responsibility is to myself, to honor the lessons learned without becoming defined by the experience that taught them, to remain open to connection while maintaining healthy boundaries, to offer trust as a gift freely given, not a vulnerability to be exploited. On the eve of my birthday, I find myself in a reflective mood. A year ago, I was angry, hurt, and disillusioned. Today, I'm cautiously optimistic, more self-aware, and surprisingly grateful. Not for the deception or the financial strain, those I could have happily lived without, but for the growth that followed, for the stronger sense of self that emerged from the rubble of a relationship built on quicksand. Tomorrow, I'll celebrate another year of life, another journey around the sun. I'll enjoy the company of people who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. I'll appreciate the gifts offered with genuine affection, not calculated manipulation. And I'll raise a glass to the painful wisdom of experience, to the costly education in human nature that has made me more discerning without making me bitter. Because that's the real victory here. Not just surviving betrayal, but refusing to let it harden me against the possibility of genuine connection. Not just recovering financially, but reclaiming my capacity for generosity without naivety. Not just moving on, but moving forward with clearer vision and stronger boundaries. And if that isn't worth celebrating, I don't know what is.